All right, welcome to another Instagram live session Q&A with your boy Mehran, here to discuss everything logic games. So the way it's going to work today is we will discuss logic games. We'll go over a little introductory discussion just to get everyone up to speed on this section and how to best improve. And then obviously we'll turn it over for Q&A. But first, a couple of logistical things that we want to discuss. First, if you missed any of the previous Instagram live sessions, they are available on YouTube, so feel free to check them out. You just need to follow our YouTube channel, which is at LSATMax or LSATMax. This will also be live on YouTube as well, and it will also be live for 24 hours on our Instagram channel. So in case you need to leave early, you can always come back and catch the rest of it. Another major announcement that we need to make sure everyone's aware of: if you are taking the September LSAT, tonight at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time is the registration deadline, right? So make sure that you register if you haven't already. Obviously, you can do that by going to LSAT's site and registering for the September LSAT. Again, the registration deadline is tonight, August 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. And then the last thing, obviously, you can tell we've upgraded from the whiteboard. If you have any troubles, issues, or things that we can help with, feel free to text us. Text LSAT to 310-818-7743. Set up a free consult. Happy to help any way we can. So with that introduction out of the way, let's dive right into our discussion of logic games, which is also referred to as analytical reasoning. You have one scored section of logic games on your actual LSAT. It is going to consist of 22 to 25 questions, 4 separate games. Each game will have 5 to 8 questions per game. Now, on average, that comes out to 8 minutes and 45 seconds per game. Obviously, we'll talk about, timing and how to approach that. But again, that's an average, right? Some games are going to take longer. Some games will take less time. But on average, we're going to have 8 minutes and 45 seconds per game. And the idea of logic games is really designed to measure your ability to understand the relationship between variables and draw conclusions about those variables. And the idea being you're going to be given a set of statements and rules that describe a relationship among people, things, or events. And we're going to be asked to stitch those together like patchwork and draw conclusions about them. So obviously, the setup is going to be really important. But in addition to the setup, how we approach the questions is also going to matter. Now, in terms of the digital LSAT, I am of the opinion that this is the section that's experiencing the most change, because obviously it's a very visual part of the exam, which requires paper pencil, right? We're going to be setting up our setups on paper and pencil. We're going to be doing our hypotheticals, our diagrams, right? All on paper and pencil. And now that the exam is no longer paper pencil and it's going to be administered digitally on a tablet, we're going to be using 2 different mediums, right? We're going to be doing our work on scratch paper, but answering the questions digitally on the tablet. So obviously, we'll talk about how that's going to impact your setups, the importance of organization. As we dive in here, let's go over the types of logic games that you will encounter on the LSAT. And this is obviously LSATMax's categorizations. Different companies might refer to these as these games slightly differently. But these are the basic types of games that you will encounter. You will encounter linear games. You will encounter grouping games, right? You will encounter multilinear games, right? If you want to see some examples, so the idea of a linear game would be 5 people are going to be scheduled to be on a television show, and we're trying to organize those 5 people in a sequential order. Group game, right? We see 2 types of group game: in, out, where you're selecting 4 of 7 or 5 of 8 of the variables to be in. The other type of group game that you will encounter is taking those 8 variables and splitting them into 2 groups or 3 groups, right? Is another type of group game that you'll encounter. Multilinear games are linear games that add an additional variable. So going back to our example of 5 television show contestants, a multilinear game would add a variable such as male and female, right? Something else to consider as you sort these or place these variables in the sequential order. And then you have hybrid games, which is a combination of linear and group games. So the idea here would be 4 of 7 dogs are going to win awards in a dog show. So we're selecting 4 of 7 to be in, and then we're going to rank those 4 in a sequential order, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then some other game types here, guru games, which are really the idea of where you can come up with every single scenario. And we have some questions about how do we know something is a guru game? How do I know I should try to draw out additional scenarios? And the idea there is that there's something extremely restrictive. Some variable has only 1 or 2 placements that it could possibly go. And when you start to place that very restrictive variable, other variables start to fall into place, right? And that is how you would start to realize that this might be a guru game. And while guru games will obviously take more time in terms of the setup, it's definitely worth it because once you have every possibility listed in front of you, you're going to breeze through the questions, right? So obviously something to be aware of. And then the last category here is what we call the Lost Boys, which are just games that don't fall into any of these other categories. Some of the visual mapping games that you see would definitely fall into that category. Very rare, but they do appear, so something to be aware of. And that's really the general idea of logic games in terms of the section, the types of questions that you're going to encounter. And so now let's dive into a little bit about the specific digital LSAT changes, right, that you definitely want to be aware of as you progress with your prep. So one thing to be aware of is that the LSAT rewards students who make use of previous work. And the idea here being as you progress through the game, as you draw hypotheticals, as you go through the different questions, that those hypotheticals will be useful to you on future questions, right? And by keeping your organization nicely and neatly organized, you'll be able to rely on that work. This was much easier to do in the paper pencil LSAT world because the game was on a piece of paper in front of you. A, B, C, D, E were on a piece of paper in front of you. So it was very easy to do your work next to it and follow along. So one of the questions we got is how would I recommend setting up my scratch paper? And I would literally do something like this, where you have the question number, you have the answer choices, and this way, when I do hypotheticals, I can have it right next to A, right next to B. And then obviously, if you want to eliminate answer choices, you can just swipe or do a slash through. But that's literally how I would set my piece of paper up and have that organization so that I can take advantage of it, because you know you're going to encounter which of the following must be true. The correct answer is going to be E. And if you're using previous work, you can quickly eliminate A through D, select E and move on. But if you're not, it's a time trap question that will obviously cause you major issues. So that's obviously something to be aware of in terms of the digital LSAT. Other trends that we've noticed is something that I definitely want to highlight is there's this new question that has become very common, and it's generally the last question in a game where they basically say, which of the following, if substituted for X, and X would be one of the rules of the game, would have the same effect in determining whatever the game is about, the order of the TV contestants, right? And so the idea there in terms of how to best approach those question types, which is another question that we've been receiving, is you really want to make sure you have a good setup, right? Because if your setup is solid, all you want to do is replace the answer choice with the rule that they're asking you to swap it out with. And if nothing changes, it's the right answer. If anything changes, it's eliminated as an answer choice. We can move on, right? So definitely be aware of that new question type because it is much more prevalent. And that's really the general overview. Now, again, guys, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop them into the question queue here. You can just actually write it into question. That way I can show it on the screen as soon as we turn to the Q&A part of this. so that other students can obviously take advantage of what is bothering you. In terms of the best way to prepare. Now, the beauty of the logic games portion is it's the easiest, it is the easiest part of the LSAT to improve on. And I think the reason for that is it's also the easiest part of the exam to see how repetitive it is, right? Where, you know, people in a race is the same thing as firefighters being assigned their work for the week, right? It's linear in nature. So, you start to realize how fast, how repetitive the games are, and that obviously is going to make you feel a lot better about encountering games on your LSAT, because the hope is on your LSAT, you're going to encounter a game that will remind you of a game that you've seen before. This game reminds me of Birds in the Forest. Fantastic, because that's going to help you set it up. It's going to help you not hesitate. It's going to allow you to move quickly through the games, right? So the best way to approach a logic game, again, once you have the foundation in place, and we'll talk a little about what I mean by that foundation. I have some examples that I want to highlight for you guys today just to make sure that we're thinking about logic games the right way. But once we have the foundation in place, I know how to approach linear games. I know how to approach group games. And for those of you who are using LSATMax and you're wondering how come Mehran didn't mention sequencing games, because sequencing games is actually just a type of linear game, right? Which is a rare type because every rule is a sequencing relationship, whereas it's more common to get a linear game where some of the rules are sequencing relationships, but not all of them. So once you have that foundation in place, my recommendation is get every logic game ever released and start going through them. Give yourself 8 minutes and 45 seconds. If you're able to complete the game on time and get it perfect, I want you to put it in one pile. If you're not able to get it perfect or finish it on time, I want you to put it in a separate pile. Now, obviously, you want to spend the time to review all of the games, whether you get it right, whether you get it wrong, because you really want to make sure that you're getting it right for the right reasons, right? And yes, again, analytical reasoning is the exact same thing as logic games. They're synonymous. So when I say logic games, I'm referring to analytical reasoning. I do know that some people call it analytical reasoning. Some people call it logic games. The LSAT's official term is analytical reasoning. I think logic games is the slang. But when you review these games, what I want you to do is focus on your setup. And if you miss a deduction, right, I want you to focus in on what rule or what combination of rules allowed that deduction to be made, with the hope being that if you encounter that rule or combination of rules again, this time you'll make the deduction. So let me give you a very simple example. On a linear game, that's 1-to-1, right? 1-to-1 means every variable shows up once and only once. If I was to be told that A comes before B, well, I know right away B can't be first, A can't be last, right? This is a very simple example, but it's the same idea. The idea being what you can and cannot do with the different rules. And something that we should definitely be aware of is the difference between not both and either or. So let's go over not both. And now this concept here is going to be appearing on group games, sufficient and necessary conditions. And Brandy, I see your question. The video that I would refer you to for the sufficient and necessary drills is our video lesson on sufficient and necessary conditions, which is obviously what we're talking about here. And it's really important to understand the difference between not both and either or. Okay? So let's talk about not both. The idea of something being mutually exclusive, right? You can't be both. So, for example, I cannot be in both Los Angeles and New York at the same time, right? So if I was in LA, I'm obviously not in New York. If I'm in New York, I'm obviously not in LA, right? But there's a possibility that I'm in neither, right? What if I'm in Paris or Tokyo or Tehran, right? Any of these would rule out the possibility that I'm in New York or Los Angeles. And you notice the necessary condition here, if I don't have B, it tells me nothing. If I don't have A, it tells me nothing. I can't go backwards here, right? So the possibility is present that neither New York or Los Angeles exists, right? Let's compare that now to either or. Either or, the best example for either or is a 24-hour store, think about 7-Eleven, with two employees, Peter and Paul, okay? If one's not there, the other has to be there, right? So you notice if not A, Paul's not present, Peter's going to be present. If Peter's not present, Paul's going to be present, right? But nothing is stopping them from being present together. You notice, if I have B, B is a necessary condition. It tells me nothing about A being present or not being present. So the possibility of A and B being present together, Peter and Paul being at the store together, exists, is valid, right? And this is really important because how these ideas are treated on an in and out group game is very different. And so this is what I'm talking about. Again, another example of what you can and can't do with the rules. On an in and out group game, if I get either or, I can 100% conclude that one of A or B is going to be present, right? Because remember the scenarios. If Peter's not there, Paul is present. If Paul is not present, Peter is present. And the only other possibility is that they're both present together. So at minimum, one of them is going to be in. Compare that now to not both. In the not both world, right? We talked about it. If I'm in New York, I'm not in Los Angeles. If I'm in Los Angeles, I'm not in New York. If I'm in Paris, I'm in neither, right? But again, at minimum, one of them will be in the out group. So again, these are the kinds of things you want to be able to do. And then obviously in a two-group game where everyone is present, if we have a not both condition, it's going to create these reverse dual options, right, that allow you to split them apart because we know they have to be present. They can't go together. And so that is how you come up with these deductions, right? And so that is really the idea of what you're doing on logic games. When you're reviewing the games that you do, again, focus on your setup. If you miss a deduction, ask yourself what rule or combination of rules allowed that deduction to be made, with the hope being the next time you encounter it, you'll be able to make it. All right. So, now, obviously, what do you do when you finish going through all of those games? The game in the pile that you couldn't get right or you couldn't finish on time, I want you to go back and do them again. There's nothing wrong with doing a game and saying, I remember this. Again, that is the hope. My hope for you on the LSAT is every game you encounter reminds you of a game you've seen before so that you have the confidence in your setup and your approach in terms of how to attack it. And so with that said, let's dive into some questions, right? All right. So I notice you guys are dropping them in the comments. So give me a second as I scroll here. Okay. So I appreciate it. The jacket is not reversible, but I appreciate that you like it. All right. So in terms of I'm using books to study, is there any advice you have for memorizing the rules to a game? So again, it's not really about, memorization because every game is going to be different, right? I think it's about understanding what you can and can't do and how you want to approach the different game types that you encounter. So, obviously the main issue with a static textbook while trying to learn the logic games is logic games are very visual, right? It's much nicer to be able to see somebody work through it as opposed to have to read somebody work through the logic game. So I think, one of the things you might find helpful there as you try to master the logic game section is to focus on more visual guides that might be a little bit more helpful. All right, so next up. How to affect the piles in the final format. I apologize, Blue. I'm not quite sure what that means. If you want to clarify, feel free. I either do really well or really poorly on logic games. Advice for becoming more consistent. Again, I think practice makes perfect, right? Obviously, you probably do well on the ones that you're more comfortable with, and you probably are struggling on ones that you aren't very comfortable with. I think the more you expose yourself to logic games, the more your comfort will increase, and hopefully that will allow you to move through games more quickly. I think there's really two pain points for students, right? The first is the setup, right? How do I know how to set it up? What is my base, right? What does the setup look like? And then I think the next thing that really bothers students is, how do I know that I'm done with my setup? How do I know I've made all the deductions, right? Again, going back to the idea of a guru game, because we also have that extreme of, how do I know that it's not a scenario where I can come up with every single option? And so, again, I think that, again, comes back to just continuing to practice and get comfortable, right? Knowing when you've made the deductions, right? Again, it's going to be from practice. Taking as many practice logic games as possible and understanding, again, what you can and cannot do with the rules. So if you do these games, remember the importance of checking your setup, because if you miss a deduction, you really want to focus in on what caused that deduction to be made. All right, so question here from Logan. Any tips for approaching the diagnostic practice exams with a new electronic format? Also, any practice test tips in terms of taking breaks between sections and staying focused? So first, in terms of with the new digital format, we've done 2 Q&As now on the digital LSAT that are both available on YouTube. So I would definitely direct you to those. I really don't want to, use this time to speak about something that we've already spoke about in length. And again, at the beginning of this video, we also talked about the importance of your organization and setup on the digital LSAT, because again, you will be using a blank piece of paper as opposed to the previous situation with the logic games, where you were able to obviously have the shell of the game on the piece of paper to guide you. In terms of tips for taking breaks and staying focused, in terms of between sections, well, if you're taking a full-length digital LSAT as a simulated exam, you should take your break after the 3rd section, right? Because that is when your actual exam break is going to take place. So that's something to definitely mimic. Now, in terms of just generally taking breaks, remember, studying for the LSAT is extremely mentally draining, right? Mental fatigue is very common for students. When that occurs, it's a good idea to take a break, walk away, come back when you are mentally refreshed, right? And that's why we recommend not taking more than 1 full-length simulated exam per week. If you want to continue to practice under time pressure, do individual sections, right? It's a great way to continue to practice under time pressure without experiencing the mental fatigue of the 5 sections in a row. A question from Mama Zippy. How do I find all the logic games from past tests? Well, great question. LSATMax offers all of them, both in our comprehensive courses, as well as in our new app, which is Practice LSATs by LSATMax, which is just the digital LSAT simulator. I'll pull it up here so you guys can see it real quick. Sorry. Try that again. But the idea is they are available a la carte, the digital LSATs. You can also get them from LSAC. They would be the paper pencil versions other than 71, 73, and 74, which again, remember, 71, 73, and 74 are all available for free on LSAC's website. But you can get the digital LSATs from LSATMax as well. Another question here. Now that the questions are separate from scratch paper, I imagine there's some kind of difficulty keeping track of separate diagrams. Exactly. No, absolutely there is. And that's why we are highlighting the importance of keeping your setup nicely and neatly organized. The idea being you would have an area for your setup, right? Just like paper pencil logic games, I'm not going to touch my setup. I'm going to leave that alone. And then I will be able to do hypotheticals next to the answer choice for each question. Keep that nice and neatly organized so I can use my previous work as I progress through a game. And if you don't know what I mean by using previous work, I think we should pause a second and talk about that. So, if you get a must-be-true question on a logic game, must-be-true means that it's the case in every scenario. So if in any of your previous work you can find a counterexample, that would show you that that does not have to be true. And so you would be able to eliminate any answer choice where you can show that that scenario exists somewhere, right? Because, or doesn't exist somewhere, because that would mean that it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Same idea from the opposite side on could be true questions or cannot be true questions, right? If something could be true, all I need to do is find one example that shows it's possible. So if I have any previous hypotheticals that show an answer choice on a could be true question, that is going to be the correct answer, right? Same idea with cannot be true, right? If I find an example that shows it's possible, that shows me that it could be true, which would eliminate that answer choice as a possibility on a cannot be true question, right? And so that is the idea there in terms of using previous work. Oh, sorry. All right, we're back. All right, so let's see what else. Advice for splitters. No idea what a splitter is. Let's go on to more questions here. So again, we talked about this one. So in terms of, you can buy the paper pencil versions right off Amazon, you know, the LSAT's prep test books. But if you're looking for the digital versions, unfortunately, currently the only place to get those is directly from LSAT's website. Again, they offer 71, 73, and 74 free. Outside of that, check out Practice LSATs by LSATMax. The app is free to download on both iOS and Android, so both in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And if you guys want to see what logic games look like, there you go. That would be a logic game from the June 2007 LSAT on Practice LSATs by LSATMax. And then obviously every other prep test is available to purchase a la carte, with the new exams being $10, the older exams being $3. And while we're on that subject, stay tuned for a giveaway that we will announce at the end of this Instagram Live, where you might be able to get a free digital LSAT from us. I can't say for sure. Okay, so I think a splitter is a high GPA, low LSAT applicant, or vice versa. Well, if that's the case, I mean, for those of you who still aren't sure, just remember that the LSAT is the number one factor in law school admissions, without question. Sorry about that. Having a high GPA is not going to help unless you also have the LSAT score you're going to need. Having a low GPA is going to be irrelevant as long as you get the LSAT score you're going to need. And again, we've talked about this. If you guys want, last week's session was on LSAT prep strategies. We've talked a lot about these concepts, so definitely check it out. Is it advantageous to study using only recent LSATs, spoken knowledge? Great question. No. There's nothing wrong with the older LSATs. You should be aware of the differences, right? Just so that when you do the older LSATs, you know, for example, anything before June 2007 will not have comparative reading comp passages, right? Okay, fine. So you instead of having 3 solitary passages and 1 comparative passage, you have 4 solitary passages. It doesn't matter, right? In terms of everything else, it's going to be a great representation of how you're doing. The other thing that changes over time is the frequency of question types. Like if you notice, like over time, if, you know, principal questions have become more common, right? But like these are minor variations. So, and obviously, as we talked about at the beginning of this, you know, this new logic game question where they ask you to suspend a condition and replace it with another condition is a new question. but these are minor differences. So nothing wrong with using older exams. The way LSATMax works is we draw the homework questions from older exams. The hope being, let's, start with practicing, getting you comfortable on the older questions. Once you have that foundation in place and we turn our attention to simulated practice, we're going to be doing that on the new questions, right? Sweet Steffi, is it better to have one good setup or exhaust all the setups you can come up with? Again, the only time you should be trying to exhaust all the setups is in the Guru Games scenario, right? And the only reason you would try that is that there's something super restrictive about the game. When you place that super restrictive thing, other things start to fall into place nicely. So, the first one we introduce in our course is in the group game lesson, even though it's a Guru game as well, we introduce it as a group game, is the appetizer main dish game. For those of you who remember that game, if you think about what made that game so restrictive, it was the numerical distribution possibilities, right, of 3, 4, 2, 5, and then, the not both rules that made us have the kind of split that, we showed over here. We're filling up the 2, right? So it became very easy then to roll out the rest of the scenarios, right? So that's really what you're looking for. Some variable that's really restrictive. When you place that variable, other variables fall into place. If you do not see that, you should not waste any time trying to come up with all the setups. And I think this is actually another great thing to talk about in terms of group games. So Birds in the Forest would be an example of this. There's another game where it was fruits on a fruit stand, right? And it was all sufficient and necessary conditions, right? And so one of the questions students get is, should I diagram the rules, write the contrapositive, and then sit there making all the transitive chains that are possible? And the answer is absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. All you want to do on a game like that is diagram the rules, diagram it, write the contrapositive, right? And then you want to move on to the questions, because the questions are going to invoke the sufficient conditions, right? They're going to invoke one of these conditions, and then you can follow the chains at that question instead of wasting time doing things at the beginning that you're then going to have to do at the question as well. And so be very comfortable with that scenario on a group game where all of the rules are sufficient and necessary conditions. All we're doing is diagramming, writing the contrapositive, moving on to the questions and applying those conditions. And so again, that was the Sweet Steffi's question that we just answered. So I hope that was helpful. Moving on. Best way to practice without wiping all previous answers in analytics. So I'm assuming this means that you have gone through and done all of the questions and you want to continue to practice without wiping previous answers in analytics. Unfortunately, I don't know how that would be possible. Now, obviously, if the idea is that you want to save your analytics, what I would say is maybe just take a screenshot of it, right, as it was, so you have that data, and then reset your progress and keep going. So let's see, what other questions? So we talked about advantageous using real LSATs, and then let me check to see. We definitely got some questions that came through via email and text. So give me a second as I pull those up, and we will make sure we answer all of those as well. Oh, we got this. So again, I'm still not sure I'm understanding what pile separation means. I'm not sure if this is referring to some kind of strategy from a different LSAT prep company. So again, I think, if it's referring to, how to set up, how to organize on a piece of paper, I think we have discussed that. But obviously, feel free to let us know if you have any other questions. Wow, sorry guys, I am falling apart today. Okay, so okay, so let's see. So one of the questions was about trigger or key terms to look for, and again, I think again, I mean, really, I think the only triggers and keywords that you would be looking for on logic games is sufficient and necessary, right? Is there something that I need to diagram? Because other than that, the things that we're looking for are the conditions of the game that they're giving us, and obviously making sure that we are setting those up and diagramming them correctly to ensure that, as we progress through the game and our setup is created, that it's accurate. So I think the key for any logic games is the conditions and making sure that we diagram those correctly. Okay, separating the ones we got right. Okay, so here we go. Well, again, so yes, so the difference is, yeah, you're not doing them paper pencil anymore, right? So I get that. So I think the idea would be we would just be flagging the games that we're not getting correct and revisiting those, right? Because yes, I would recommend doing as many games as possible in the format that you're going to experience on your exam, which in North America is going to be digital on a tablet. Yes, I would highly recommend doing that. So, Richard, this question is really one that we answered last week, so definitely check out last week's Q&A. It varies. It depends on where you start and where you want to go. Generally speaking, the larger that spread, the longer it will take you to get there. So, Mary C 2.0, can you provide tips on how to diagram rules properly? So in terms of sufficient and necessary, right, like these ideas here that we went over at the beginning of this Q&A, the idea of not both, either or. If you're struggling with this concept, what I would recommend is watching our sufficient and necessary lesson in LSATMax. Now, if you have the app and you're not a student, you can actually purchase just that section. So what you want to do is if you go into the app and you go into the store from the left menu, and then at the top you see individual sections, right? And here you can buy sufficient and necessary, which is right here. I want to say that it is $49.99. And what that will unlock is our video lesson on sufficient and necessary conditions, where we will go over in detail all of the rules. That video is actually over almost 2.5 hours long, where we go over all the rules, all the conditions, how to diagram them, and then what you can and can't do with them. And then in addition to that, you'll also get the homework assignment as well. But, remember, sufficient and necessary conditions are very prevalent on group games. And you really want to make sure that you understand the difference between either or and not both that we talked about earlier today. Again, just pulling it up one more time for you, being able to see the difference between not both and either or, right? So definitely make sure you review that stuff. Solito Karina 1, do you have to pay to get all of the prep test LSATs? Yes, you do. Unfortunately, they are not available for free unless you are an LSAT fee waiver student. If you have an LSAT fee waiver, you will get every LSAT available free of charge, both in LSATMax with our premium course, but you also have access to all of them in Practice LSATs by LSATMax as well. So definitely take advantage of that if it applies to you. So making progress here. Now, other questions. So some of these questions are I'm sorry. So but never early. In terms of how, if you're referring to how to take advantage of our fee waiver scholarship, all you need to do is apply for a fee waiver. That's a process that's done through LSAT, right? So you would apply for a fee waiver through LSAT, and then once you're approved, all you need to do is submit that fee waiver to us, and you will get complimentary access to not only our premium course, which is all the substantive lessons, homework assignments, everything that comes with the LSATMax course, but you will also have every digital LSAT ever. So, but never early. We'll reach out to you in a private message as well, but you can send that to support@testmaxprep.com, and that's all you need to do to get that started. So just submit it to support@testmaxprep.com. All right, so another question about the fee waiver. If we have fee waivers about your course, could we still get whatever updates there? So again, every LSATMax student gets access to all of our updates free of charge. So absolutely. Now, obviously, the one thing though, in order to get the fee waiver scholarship, you have to have had a fee waiver that was valid when you enrolled in LSATMax. It can't be a retroactive thing. All right, so let's see. Let me make sure that we have covered everything that we wanted to discuss in terms of all of the questions. So we definitely got some questions about timing as usual, right? Students struggling with timing. And again, I think it's completely natural. And again, I think, your timing bottlenecks on logic games are going to be one of two things, right? The first thing being, how do I know that I've set it up properly, right? How do I know I've made the deductions that I needed to make, right? And then obviously moving to the questions and going through the question. And I think, that, as we've really emphasized today, is it's really about practice. The more that you expose yourself to these concepts, the more comfortable you will become, because again, as we mentioned, the logic game portion of the LSAT is by far the easiest section to improve on. And again, I feel that that's the case because it's also the easiest section to realize how repetitive the exam is. Again, just, keep working hard. But the other thing to make sure that you're doing, right? Because as we studied before, there's a tendency of students to just do practice, not see results, and then wonder why, right? If you're not addressing the underlying foundational issues, right? If you're not addressing your foundation, your strategies, your techniques, and you just keep doing questions you're not really going to see the type of improvement you're hoping for, right? What's important is to spend the time to make sure that you understand what you're doing as you progress through the logic games. And again, remember, just like you can purchase sufficient and necessary a la carte, you can also purchase our logic games lessons a la carte and unlock all of logic games, right? So if that's something that you're struggling with and you just want to focus on logic games, that is available to do in the LSATMax app. Again, just go to the left menu, enter the store, and then navigate to individual sections. All right. So other things, again, just to really highlight for you guys as you think about logic games and the new digital LSAT. So again, the way you want to approach it is have scratch paper, and then have your digital game in front of you, and get super comfortable with the idea of doing the setup and your hypotheticals as you move through the game on a piece of paper, but answering the questions on the tablet, because that is going to be how you're going to be required to proceed through the games on the digital LSAT. So definitely make sure that you expose yourself to that as much as possible. If you remember in our digital LSAT recap Q&A, the most important piece of feedback that I think we got from students is those who didn't practice on the digital LSAT were really surprised at how different the process was. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it's going to be something that you need to worry about on exam day. so long as you spend the time to get yourself acclimated with this new medium that you'll be experiencing on exam day. And so, yeah, I think that is a pretty good overview of logic games. Let's just make sure that we didn't miss any questions here. Could you address? So this question, we did talk about it, but let's go over it. So the idea is, could you address how to go about setting up logic games questions, especially group games, and how does one know when the setup is complete? So again, as we look at the two group game scenarios, right, that we generally see, you have the two group game, well, sometimes it can be three group game where you're splitting variables in these groups, and then you have the in-out game where you're selecting 4 of 7, 5 of 7 to place in, and then the rest would be out, right? So how do you know when you're done setting it up? So again, most group games, right, all you want to do is, again, go through the rules, diagram them, right? Again, assuming that they're sufficient and necessary. They won't all be sufficient and necessary, but you do see a lot of sufficient and necessary on group games. And then I think it's about being able to make the deductions like the ones we see here. If I do have a two group game that's 1-to-1 and I have a not both condition, I can create this reverse dual option every time, right? So if they had another rule that said C and D can't go together, well, then I just filled in another spot, C, D, D, C, right? Reverse dual options here. Different concept in the in-out scenario, right? So again, this is what you really want to get comfortable with. How do you know what you are doing with the rules that you're given? But again, I think another thing that's really important to remember, that on group games, you see it with birds in a forest, as well as, the fruit stand game, where every rule is a sufficient and necessary statement. They're all conditional statements, right? Which again, they don't do anything until they are invoked. So in that scenario, all you want to do is diagram each rule, write the contrapositive, right? And then move to the questions, because the questions are going to invoke these conditions, and then you can do the transitive property, contrapositive property, right, to come to the conclusions about what is the case and what isn't the case. And if you want to see that, just go find birds in the forest. We introduced birds in the forest in our group game lesson. And I'm pretty sure the fruits in a fruit stand game is in the group games homework. If you're not an LSATMax student and you want to know what games those are, just send us a message and we're happy to share you which prep test we're referring to. I just don't know it off the top of my head. But those are great examples to go over. Now, in terms of unless statements, okay. So we can talk about unless statements. So how do you deal with unless? So remember, unless is just like without, just like until. And it has two parts to the formula. The first part is whatever follows unless is the necessary condition, right? The second part of the formula, right, is that you're going to negate the other part of the statement, and that's going to be your sufficient condition, right? And yes, obviously, my example was because of the typo in the email announcing the IG Live, where obviously we said, unless I have a time machine, right? And so the joke was, you can practice diagramming that. But you definitely want to be clear on the formulas, guys. And it's something that, it's coming up every single Instagram Live that we've done so far. So let's re-emphasize it just one last time. There's not a lot of things to memorize when it comes to LSAT prep. And that's great because, again, it's not a subject-based exam. It's not going to ask you to just memorize and regurgitate. It's going to change the way you think. But there are certain parts, the rules of sufficient and necessary, quantifiers as well, but quantifiers are a lot rarer, so not as important. But the rules of sufficient and necessary, you should know them like the back of your hand. And really, any LSAT prep provider that's downplaying the importance of sufficient and necessary is not somebody that I would rely on for LSAT prep. I mean, it is by far the most commonly tested form of reasoning on the exam. It's not only appears all over logical reasoning, but also on logic games, as we've seen here with the examples that we've done together about group games, right? And so again, something that you definitely want to get comfortable with. Not only not both and either or. Again, remember either or, 24-hour store, 2 employees, not both. Just think about being in New York and Los Angeles, right? You can't be there at the same time. But again, nothing's preventing you from being in a third place, which would rule out both possibilities. All right, so let's see. So again, in terms of, we keep getting the questions about, how students felt, the ones that took the July exam. And again, we really had a nice recap 2 weeks ago on the first digital LSAT and students' experience about it. We talked a lot about how they felt about the logic games. One of the things that, people complained about was the highlighting and underlining, which, it's funny because we actually have had some people reach out talking to us about that functionality in our app. And so I guess it's something that we just want to emphasize for everyone is how it works. So when you're trying to highlight, remember that you're going to have to exert pressure because without the pressure, there's no way for the system to know that you're trying to highlight, right? So basically, you just tap the highlight color and then tap and exert pressure to highlight. And so that is the way it works. It's not something where you can just slide your finger across without any pressure and think it's going to highlight, right? I wish technology had progressed that far, but it hasn't yet. So you're still going to need to exert some pressure. So again, just going through these questions. So one of the questions was, how do you suggest using features on the digital LSAT like the highlighter and underlining? And again, I'm not sure, how useful those features are going to be on logic games, right? If you think about, taking it when it was paper pencil, were you really highlighting or underlining anything? No, you were diagramming the rules, right? Coming up with a setup. I feel the highlighting and underlining will be more useful for logical reasoning and reading comp, right? Logical reasoning in particular, because one of the things you want to do is, if it's an argument, you want to identify the conclusion. And if that means underlining it, right, or highlighting it, it's great. I mean, you just want to make sure you have a clear understanding of that. So I personally wouldn't be highlighting and underlining a lot on the logic games because, I think the more important part of your success is going to be your scratch paper. And again, the way I would recommend doing it is have an area for your setup that you don't mess with, and then have this kind of setup for each question. So again, if you guys want to see, I would literally draw my hypothetical right next to that A, right? And then I would have B, right? And so forth. And then obviously, as I go through, I can eliminate the ones that don't make sense, right? But then I would have this neatly organized. So when I go to question 2, maybe I can rely on question 1, right? And remember, let's not forget, most of the time, right, the first question that we get is, which of the following is a complete and accurate list? The correct answer on that is a free hypothetical that you're definitely going to want to draw out and have on your piece of paper that you might be able to rely on as you progress with the question. And so, yeah, I think that's a pretty much it. Now, again, guys, don't forget, and you don't have to text LSAT. I think, texting LSAT would just give you a short questionnaire where we'll ask you a few questions to get a better understanding of where you are. But you can actually text anything to this number if you have any questions or you want to speak to one of our LSAT coaches about your specific situation and how to improve it. And so with that, I think I just want to chat about our giveaway. So for those of you who stayed until the end, The giveaway is going to be pretty simple. What we're going to do is we're going to post a photo that we're then going to ask you to like and tag 2 friends in the photo, in the comments. Also make sure that you follow our Instagram account, and then share the photo in your story and tag us. And what we're going to do is we're going to be selecting winners at random. You will get an amazing LSATMax t-shirt just like this, and they're really soft, so you really enjoy wearing that around, and then you can tell everyone about how you were able to crush the LSAT when they ask you about your cool shirt. But then, in addition to that, we will be giving away a digital LSAT of your choice. So in Practice LSATs by LSATMax, you can pick whichever LSAT that you want, and we will unlock it for you for free as part of the giveaway. So again, in order to enter, all you want to do is follow our LSATMax account on Instagram. We're going to post a photo. It should be live very shortly, announcing the giveaway. Like that photo, tag 2 friends in the comment, and then share that photo on your story and tag us, and you will automatically be entered. And we'll be giving away a number of them, not just one. So we'll probably do X per number of entries that we receive. So definitely take advantage of that. And again, I really appreciate you guys coming out to join us. If you have any questions that we weren't able to get to, please, again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to help any way we can. And I guess we will see you guys next time for another Instagram Live. Coming to you live from TestMax HQ. I appreciate you guys coming out. And for those of you, again, who are taking the September LSAT, if you haven't registered, you literally have about 8 hours left to get that done, okay? So go to LSAT's website and register for the September LSAT if that's the exam you are planning to take. Because again, the deadline is tonight, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Obviously, if you already are an LSATMax user and you have an account with us, you would have already received the reminders this morning. But here is your last reminder. Make sure you register for the September LSAT if you are planning to take it, because if you wake up tomorrow and you didn't do it, you're going to have to wait till October. So thanks again, guys, for coming out to join me. And again, don't forget, download LSATMax if you haven't already.